Hey guys, welcome to Antel Economics, and today we're back again with podcast 8. It's Free Trade Overrated, hosted by myself and Alan. So before we get into that, we've got Tweet of the Week. So Tweet of the Week this week was Marcus Rashford has done an astonishing job campaigning for something that should have been dealt with years ago. Feel young people with equal opportunities no matter their background. This was in response to the U-turn the government has made based on Marcus Rashford's campaign about giving young school children summer meals.
So yeah, today's podcast is about free trade. So to begin with, we obviously have the topic of Brexit. I feel like it's been kind of overshadowed with the whole pandemic thing, rightly so. But yeah, in terms of trade and Brexit, well, what do you think, Ravi, initially?
Well, I think obviously if we look at it from the pandemic's perspective, it has been heavily affected. A lot of trade obviously comes from areas like China, where there's obviously globalization has occurred because you can get cheaper labor out there. But then I think a lot of firms have realized the actual downside of having that because there's been massive supply shocks and there's been massive build-ups of supply within warehouses, and I think they're essentially running out of space.
Yeah, no, I agree. Kind of this kind of interdependency between countries in terms of trade it is kind of vulnerable to a kind of worldwide pandemic or shock, and we're seeing that with all like the fall in prices, the fall in demands affecting each country. So yeah, I think that obviously we know about the pandemic, but in terms of Brexit, when we leave the EU, we're going to be leaving their kind of free trade policy, and that opens up the opportunity for tariffs. What do you think on that?
Well, obviously tariffs can be not quite so beneficial to an extent, as obviously it can increase the price of exports as well as imports, and means that obviously it could negatively affect our trade balance because obviously we know the UK already suffers with a trade deficit.
Yeah, no, that's true. But a kind of like one argument that people say is that by imposing these tariffs and kind of becoming more lenient towards protectionism, we're going to be encouraging our domestic industry. Do you think that's a potential for the UK to explore? And kind of like with the pandemic, I think if countries become more self kind of sustainable, it could prevent the kind of severity of these kind of pandemics in the future.
Yeah, I think from the pandemic, a lot of firms will learn and they will realize that obviously they might have to move their obviously manufacturing and supply to a more nearby location that could involve being just centralized in the UK, for example. So I think it would actually be quite beneficial to have more the revival of manufacturing in places like the UK. We
Yeah.
could have more manufacturing industries in say Birmingham, the Midlands, where they have been on a bit of a decline, and this would also help fuel our regional inequality.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, like regions like Manchester, Northeast England, those kind of places with manufacturing as the majority of income would benefit from a kind of increase in production.
Yeah. Also, what about trading with like other countries outside of the EU? So obviously, if we don't have this free trade, it will obviously leave the UK free to trade with countries like Rwanda, for example.
Yeah, no. I think with the kind of exiting of the EU, it's going to open up more international relationships outside of Europe for Britain. I feel like stronger trade relations with India, with America can be forged. And I think it's an opportunity for kind of the UK to streamline in foreign investment into countries like Rwanda or developing emerging markets and kind of get a foothold in their kind of economies.
Yeah, I see your point with that. Um, Definitely getting a foothold in countries like Rwanda could be beneficial, especially in the long run, as if we can help fuel their development. Maybe in the future they can give back to the UK,
Yeah,
and well, it works out as a good relationship. Whereas just being in the EU, helping out advanced countries, trading with advanced countries, there
yeah.
is no real benefit in the long run for the UK.
Yeah, I can see what you mean. On the topic of kind of trade and free trade and stuff like that, this is kind of like a broad question, but do you think that free trade is kind of over glorified? Do you think the negatives of free trade, namely, especially globalization, do you think the negatives of that have been kind of neglected by people?
I think free trade can be quite beneficial. I think people don't. Well, I think people understate the value of it. I
Mm.
think, the fact that we can have countries like China produce the quantity of goods that they do produce for the price that they produce is actually something quite remarkable. They have such a strong labor force, and
Yeah.
it enables free trade.
Yeah, no, I could see that point, but in terms of let's say China, their primary resource is the labor, the free labor, and because of globalization and free trade, firms will obviously choose to operate in China. What that means is though, all of these manufacturing jobs that could have been present in the domestic industry of United States, United Kingdom, they're going to be lost because of these outsourcing programs. And so you could say that this free trade kind of issue here, yes, it's helping China's employment, but it's also negative for United States and United Kingdom employment.
Yeah, I see your point there as well. I think a lot of firms in these big countries, they always look to make the profit, and the profit is by outsourcing the labor. But to pay someone in the UK the national living wage to
Yeah,
produce goods will be far, far greater than paying people in China, where there's such a high demand for labor, and therefore it can just drive the prices down.
yeah, no, I can see that. But there is another thing. Like, obviously, it seems beneficial for the firms, but then you could argue when these firms they operate in China, they operate in these emerging markets. They are basically transferring intellectual property across borders, and when they do that, these Chinese workers, these Chinese officials there, they will learn how to make these products. They will learn how to operate the firm in the way that these Western countries do. And what they can do is they can mix this kind of knowledge that they've gained with the cheap labor that they have to kind of create companies like Huawei, these kind of Chinese companies who can hugely undercut the prices of other companies and kind
Yeah.
of compete with them.
Yeah, I see your point there. That is a very, very good point. Definitely undercutting is something that has happened a lot in China.
Yeah.
I think the only way to combat that would be some sort of government intervention. You know, we've got to incentivize firms to keep employment and open up manufacturing plants within the UK.
Yeah.
But then obviously the firms will always look for cheaper alternatives. Therefore, we need the government to sort of step in and help out, because if they don't, then there's no incentive for
Yeah.
firms to
Yeah.
keep employment in within countries.
Yeah, I also think with free trade, this touches on like Ricardo's idea of comparative advantage. Obviously, I think free trade is good, but I'm kind of playing the kind of the role of like a evaluator in saying that if countries do start producing one good in particular rather than a variety of goods, then they run the risk of kind of focusing on one kind of good in particular, and especially if it's a volatile commodity or something that demand can fluctuate in, that's definitely going to be detrimental for the economies, especially for emerging markets as well, isn't it?
Yeah, so obviously if you have like commodities like oil or gold, you've got issues there because they they don't know, what the value of these products will, how they will change and how the demand will fluctuate.
Yeah,
So I think it's, as you said, it's always definitely a risky path to go down.
yeah.
So yeah.
With the idea of like comparative advantage, do you think it's beneficial if, like, let's say one country can produce two goods better than another? What Ricardo says is that both countries should only produce one of those goods and trade with each other, and that's actually beneficial for all the total economy. Do you think that that should be done? Because those are globalization advocates say that globalization and free trade increases employment, but do you really think it increases employment?
Well, I do understand Ricardo's point there, where if you can get individual countries to specialize in one thing, it will increase the productivity of that country and therefore they can
Mhm.
export and trade with each other,
Yeah,
which is good because it builds international relations between these countries and so they become allies instead of fighting over trying to undercut each other and trying to sell their product to other countries the most. Whether
yeah,
it
yeah.
increases employment, I'm not too sure about that one.
Yeah, no, because I was gonna say that if we take like the market for, I don't know, computers and let's say pens, and let's say if one country specializes in computers and the other specializes in pens, what globalization advocates would argue is that by doing this, you're increasing the employment by having more jobs in each respective market. But I think people are kind of being ignorant towards is the fact that you're not actually creating jobs in a net kind of sense. You're just moving jobs away from the pen industry and moving it towards the kind of computer industry, if you see what I mean. It's rather than kind of creating new jobs, you're just shifting the jobs within the economy.
So yeah, I see your point of shifting jobs across, but then couldn't the new workers upskill themselves to work within those industries? So therefore, if we're going to say have a country just making pens, there's obviously going to be more pen manufacturers and more people going to upskill themselves to work in that industry.
Yeah, no, I see that point, but then I think then there raises the issue of kind of the globalization aspect. You know, as these firms get bigger and bigger, they're going to be moving production internationally. They're going to be moving their profits internationally too. You know, it just leads to a kind of leakage of potential earnings that would have been held domestically if it wasn't for this kind of ease of globalization.
Yeah, I do agree. I think, you know, the shifting of globalization definitely does lose obviously employment and stuff within native countries.
Yeah.
So I don't think that in a sense is at all beneficial for a country itself. But like I said, I'll refer back to the point of government intervention.
Yeah.
As that will be the only way that it will stop firms from performing globalization, because the countries like China will always want to take on globalization because it only helps boost their economy.
Yeah, 100%.
Ensure that they have employment.
Yeah, and also it kind of links to the idea of sustainable growth. You know, different countries won't adhere to the same environmental policies, and you know, firms that want to cut production costs might move to countries like China, India, where the kind of emissions cost is quite low compared to Western societies.
Yeah, I think one thing we've got to be careful about is also, like you said, their emission costs. So in places like China, absolutely destructive amounts of pollution, you know, which is killing thousands of people a year just in China. Whereas if this globalization was spread out to across the world, it would obviously reduce the impact of individuals, and so it would be more spread out to an effect that it wouldn't have such a staining effect.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. It is an important thing to consider as well, and it just brings out the idea of externalities as well, isn't it? Like Adam Smith's invisible hand theory. I think it neglects this idea of externalities existing. You know, even if producers and individuals go out for their own personal benefit, there's going to be externalities of their decisions, such as pollution, you know, crime, etc., which people neglect.
Yeah, I think everyone's selfish to an extent, but obviously
Yeah.
the whole theory is that to an extent, you being selfish actually benefits everyone else.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's a nice way to end it.
yeah.
So just quickly before we end, do you think free trade should continue at the level it is? Just a brief kind of overview.
I think free trade is beneficial to a good extent. Should it continue at the level it is today? I think to an extent we can actually expand. We could look at different countries, but I think free trade is quite a key part of the economy. What do you think?
I think for developing countries, free trade is essential to kind of get the economy upstarting and kicking off. But I think for largely developed Western societies such as America and the UK, I feel protectionist policies are something we need to go forward with.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, thanks for watching, guys.
Thanks for watching, guys.
Hope you enjoyed, and see you.
Make sure you subscribe.